Hi and welcome to another video of this series on simplified openings. Now in today's video I would like to address one thing that I had a personal problem with. Now if you're like me, you probably don't like the fact that in the Giuoco Piano, playing with the black pieces, we are faced with a lot of different move orders, plans, ideas that white can play against us in this very fluid and flexible opening. So that was the main reason, for example, for why I haven't really studied this opening from black's point of view, because I was just repulsed by all these possibilities that white may have. But luckily, both for you and me, I would say I think that lately I found one very interesting idea, one very tricky early move order that actually allows black to circumvent basically everything that white can try, and even more importantly, it will be black who will be trying to move order white into what black wants to get. Now, before going into the details, I will make this general assumption that we want to get a game when we are playing against the Giuoco Piano, and that as Ruy Lopez players, we are, let's say, comfortable playing these Ruy Lopez positions where black gets knight a5, c5, a6, b5, and this typical play on the queen side. So that will be the main, let's say, plan that we are going to try to get, but with a lot of, let's say, details and nuances along the way. Now, in this video, first I will give you an overview of the possibilities that black has when faced with the Italian game. I will tell you why certain variations are preferred over others, so just to give you a general idea, and I will also then go a bit more into the details to explain better my choice in this video. So after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, black has two principal main moves. One is the Italian game, let's say bishop c5, and the other one is the so-called two knights with knight f6. Now, when black decides what to do here, which move to make, it's important to understand what black allows with each of these two moves. Now, after bishop c5, the Italian game, apart from the Evans gambit with b4, which nowadays it's been largely diffused and black has several ways how to deal with it, there is one important line that white has at his disposal, and that one is line goes c3, knight f6, and now d3 would be the Giuoco Piano. That's inevitable, more or less. But an additional option for white is the move d4. And after e d4, now not the old lines with cd4, bishop b4, which are good for black, that's not really critical, but the line with e5. Yeah, and after d5, bishop b5, knight e4, cd4, we get this pretty complex, strategically complex position where theory has discovered that, well, white has some positional trumps to play with. Objectively, of course, black is perfectly fine. There is a lot of theory involved, and but it's definitely a serious line that needs to be studied. Now, this is the additional option that black allows by choosing bishop c5 and the Italian game. Now, knight f6 and the two knights, again, d3 would be the Giuoco Piano, and that's what we will be concentrating in this video. The additional option here, obviously, is the two knights variation, the move knight g5, yeah, hitting the f7 pawn. I will briefly mention the others, but they are not really critical. Knight c3, knight e4 already is very good for black. There are some gambit lines based around the move d4, but after e d4, both e5 and short castle are not again very critical, as they can be studied and should be studied, and it's well, something that black shouldn't really worry about. So the main move, the alternative to the Giuoco Piano, is the move knight g5, and after d5, e d5, I can, well, the main line is obviously knight a5, whereas for those who want to kind of make it, let's say, shorter and more practical, I could recommend the line b5. Yeah, the point being that the pawn can't really be taken if bishop b5, queen d5. It's a double attack on the bishop and the pawn on g2. Yeah. And the best move for white is the move bishop f1, defending the pawn on g2 in advance. And now knight d5, bishop b5, bishop b7. This line got some traction relatively recently. It was discovered that black has actually good compensation. Very often he goes queen d7, long castle. Even Magnus Carlsen played it with the black pieces. So for those of you who want to kind of cut short the amount of theory you need to remember against the two knights, this can be a good practical solution. So basically on move 3, black needs to decide whether bishop c5 or knight f6. Now personally I think knight f6 is the let's say more practical and even the psychologically more, let's say, ambitious choice, simply because of the fact that after knight g5 d5 in the main lines and the lines I briefly showed, white, even though white wins a pawn, but immediately is on the defensive from the start. And not many white players are comfortable defending from the start, in spite of, let's say, winning a pawn. So I think it's psychologically more comfortable for the black player to start attacking from the start and playing with the initiative. So that's why I think knight f6 is just I think practically easier to play, because the vast majority of cases white will just play d3 and we are getting to the Giuoco Piano. Okay, now in order to understand what's going to happen next, I will show you the main directions and developments in the line with the move bishop e7. Now bishop c5 obviously would be the Italian Giuoco Piano and with a lot of theory and so forth, but here we will concentrate on these plans with bishop e7. I'm not going to reveal how exactly, but I will just show you what the developments here are, so you can understand better what comes after that. So after bishop e7, castles, black's main idea here is twofold. One, in many lines, for example, let's say c3, d5 immediately gives black good play. Or let's say one idea, like I said, is the push d5. This also works after bishop b3, d5. But the other idea, the other, let's say, general plan is the so-called, let's say, Ruy Lopez plan, which is seen after, let's say, rook e1, which is a move that tries to discourage black from pushing d5, because after e5 the pawn on e5 will be hanging. And now simply d6, and for example c3, knight a5, bishop b5, a6, b5, c5, and we're getting the Ruy Lopez position. So this is what black is striving to get. I will say it again, we're trying to get a game. Okay, we just a game which is with decent chances and based on general understanding and not so much on memorization. So with this in mind, these two ideas, d6 and d5, and d6 aimed with knight a5 and so forth, are obviously pretty good for black. So lately the developments have been in another direction, and white started to play the move knight c3. Now it looks a bit strange, but if you look at it, now there is no c3, for example, at least not immediately. The knight on c3 and the bishop on d5 successfully dissuade the plans with d5. So black goes d6, and now white plays the move a4. Okay, this has been how white has been playing this variation lately. So the first thing to note is that against the standard Ruy Lopez plan with knight a5, bishop a2, c5, white in a way gets a version, like say an ideal version of the position that I'm going to show you without any extra moves. So notice, white hasn't played h3, white hasn't played rook e1, white hasn't wasted a move, so he can play bishop g5 immediately, attacking this knight on f6, and by eliminating that knight, gaining the control over the d5 square. So let's say knight c6, dropping the knight back, bishop takes f6, and knight d5. And again, it's a playable position for black, by all means, but you could argue also that white got what they wanted, because there is no extra move h3, no extra move rook e1. Just everything went very nice for white. So keep this in mind now when we're going to look at the lines a bit later. There is another plan that I'm going to mention here, which again will be important later on, and that plan starts with the move bishop g4. Black pins the knight on f3, and the immediate threat is knight d4, yeah, to target the knight on f3. So white goes h3, take on f3, queen f3, knight d4, hitting the queen and the pawn on c2, knight drops back to, queen drops back to d1, c6, and now another very important move, bishop a2. So the idea of bishop a2 is to get away from the possible attack by d5. So now after d5, the bishop is no longer attacked on c4, and to illustrate the point, d5 doesn't work so well. Knight e6 is actually better and quite playable for black, but d5, after ed5, cd5, again we have this annoying move bishop g5, attacking the knight and at the same time attacking the pawn on d5. So we see how white manages to play against black center. So keep these ideas in mind, and now I will show you the, let's say, big or small idea that I ran into. So going back to move 4, we will not play immediately bishop e7, but we will start with the move h6. And already, if you just saw the lines where bishop g5 was an important motive for white, so we kill off that immediately by playing h6. At the same time, we stop knight g5, obviously, there is no attack on f7, and also h6 is a very good waiting move. Apart from being extremely useful, it is a very nice waiting move. Now, let's explore. If white simply plays automatically and plays Giuoco Piano style with c3, we go bishop e7, castles, rook e1, stopping d5 ideas, yeah? But now we go d6, and we have a transposition to the lines we looked at. We go knight f5, c5, and we get the Ruy Lopez position, which is fine for black, especially as h6 is part of black's plan in these positions, controlling the g5 square. So here we achieved to get what we wanted, the Ruy Lopez standard position and standard plan. Another idea of h6 is that if white starts with knight c3 here, as we saw previously, the bishop is not developed yet, and it doesn't need to go to e7, it can actually go to b4 immediately, pinning the knight. And after castles, take on c3, bc3, short castle, black already has a very good position. The immediate threat is to go d5, yeah? So rook e1, yeah? Discouraging it, d6. After d6, the pawn on e5 is defended, so there is a threat of knight a5 going after the light squared bishop. And if now white saves it, and let's say goes a4, again, the Ruy Lopez plan, knight a5, attack the bishop, bishop drops back, c5, then bishop comes to e6. Again, very good position for black, no problems whatsoever. Whereas, if white goes d4, black has a choice, simple moves like, let's say, rook e8, simply defending the pawn and developing, or queen e7, yeah, or the most ambitious bishop g4, attacking the knight and winning a pawn. After h3, take on f3, queen f3, ed, cd, knight d4, queen d3, knight c6, with a pretty double-edged position. Black has knights and an extra pawn, white has bishops and a worse structure. Compensation, yes, certain compensation for white, but well, black has excellent chances for counter-attack, and obviously he's a pawn up, so the pressure is on white to create some compensation. So now you see h6, the usefulness, yeah? So if knight c3, bishop b4, or if c3, then we go bishop e7, and we go for the Ruy Lopez plan after d6 and knight a5. So if white understands all this, white will play short castle. So white is also waiting, keeping c3 and knight c3 in reserve. Now we go d6. d6 is important because we defend the pawn on a5 and immediately create the threat of knight a5 going after the bishop on c4. So white now can't really go play a move like, let's say, rook e1, because knight a5 immediately takes the light squared bishop. Similar is knight c3, knight a5, also going after the bishop. And if c3 now, we know already, knight bishop e7, and we go for the Ruy Lopez plan, knight a5, c5, short castle, and so forth. Yeah. So if white is again, let's say, shrewd and wants to kind of maneuver us into the the knight c3 a4 plan we looked at before, white will start with a4 here. Yeah, so white is gearing the game towards the plan we examined a bit earlier. Now, there is one original move that you can try. That's the move bishop e6. If you want to explore it, interesting move. Yeah, probably white should go knight c3, and after bishop c4, dc4, a5, we have this strategically complex position. White has control over the d5 square, but black will likely organize counterplay by moving the knight from f6 and pushing f5. So you can explore these positions. It's a possible way for black to play. But let's stick to the standard bishop e7. Yeah. And now white can choose, let's say, whether they go knight c3, and there is also the move a5. Yeah. And you could argue, but this is, well, maybe not so great for black because now there is no idea of knight a5, yeah, and c5 and so forth. So let's explore what happens after a5. We go castle, and now knight c3. Yeah. If white again changes track a little bit and goes c3, black has a choice of several options. One is bishop e6 immediately, exchanging bishops, and that's a fine position. Black can go rook b8 also, and then either go b6 or b5, get rid of this pawn on a5, for example, yeah, or go a6 and then bishop e6. All these are perfectly fine for black. Yeah. But what happens after knight c3? Yeah, knight c3. And now, if you remember the alternative plan I mentioned a bit earlier, yeah, after knight c3, the move bishop g4. So let's see what are the differences. You see, in that position, white had a pawn on a4 and black's pawn was on h7. Yeah. But now, if you remember, the pawn on h6 is actually quite useful in controlling that square. So if we compare h3, take on f3, queen f3, knight d4, attacking the queen, and the pawn on c2, queen d1, c6, yeah, remember the idea is to push d5, and now bishop a2. That was the idea for white in that line, but here actually it works for black, in fact, because that pawn on h6 is of great help, and black can play d5, because after e d5, cd5, white does not have the move bishop g5 at their disposal, and black's center is well protected. At the same time, this pawn on a5 is actually a liability because now black threatens to take it. So as you can see, this move h6 works very nicely in this particular variation where white goes knight c3 in combination with a5. Yeah. So we go back to the position after bishop e7, and instead of a5 we go knight c3. Yeah. So that's white's plan. Okay, still sticking to the plan I explained, a4 and knight c3. And now the standard move would be castle. Yeah. And in fact, we have a transposition to the lines we looked at before, when black, instead of, let's say, bishop g4 or knight a5, has played the move h6. But here there is one line where the move h6 actually works in white's favor. So white has different moves at his disposal. He can go h3, he can go a5, but there is also bishop d2, in a way tempting black to go for the Ruy Lopez plan with knight a5. But here it backfires because after knight a5, bishop a2, c5, white has the move knight h4. And now we see why h6 here it works in white's favor, because there is this threat of knight g6 and winning the bishop pair. Yeah. So it's a bit unpleasant. There is also ideas of knight f5 maybe, and so forth. Yeah. So in this particular position, and if black chooses this plan, let's say, h6 works against him. But going back, we can still make it work for us. The only thing we need to do, in fact, is not to castle. Yeah? So we go knight f5 immediately, not spending time on castling because the king is not really in danger. It's in the center and can castle that whenever really necessary. But since there is nothing happening in the center, the king can stay there and black can speed up his play. So knight f5 before castling, attacking that bishop, bishop a2, and now c5. And we have played h6, we haven't castled, then we have started our play in the center. And if you compare to the position previously, when I said that white actually had the ideal version, yeah, that the reason was that black had a castle and no h6, so white could go bishop g5, take on f6, and land the knight on d5. Here obviously that is not possible because bishop g5 is not possible, and this means that white needs to adjust his play. And in fact this is quite good for black already. So knight d5 immediately, for example, knight takes d5, bishop d5, drop the knight back to c6, let's say c3 castle, and this is a perfectly fine Ruy Lopez position for black because it just goes bishop e6, queen d7. Another idea is to go bishop f6 and knight e7 to target that bishop on d5, and black is perfectly fine here. The control of the d5 square brings very little to white in this position. So the engine here suggests that white goes knight d2. The idea is not so much to go f4, but rather maybe to maneuver knight c4, knight e3, or jump to d5 in different circumstances. Yeah? So knight drops back to c6, not staying with the knight on the rim for too long. And now knight d5. Yeah? Just to illustrate that f4 is not really dangerous. f4, e4, rook f4, castles, and then black has easy play. The knight can come to b4, target that bishop on a2 and control the d5 square. There is also the idea of bishop e6. Yeah, so no problems for black. Another idea for white is knight c4 that I mentioned, with the idea of knight e3 and controlling the d5 square, but knight b4 here. So you see there are drawbacks to this a4 move, and that is the very comfortable b4 square for the knight, targeting that bishop on a2 and covering the d5 square. So let's say knight e3, knight takes a2, rook takes a2, bishop e6, attacking the rook, yeah, rook a1, castles, and again, very good for black. The point is that whenever a knight lands there, black will keep capturing until white lands a pawn on d5, when black will have this mobile majority of pawns on e5 and f5, which he can further advance and hopefully create an attack on the king side. So again, this leads white nowhere. So the engine therefore after knight e6 suggests knight d5. Yeah? And now knight b4, again using the b4 square and fighting for the d5 square. So knight takes b4, cb4. And now we have a change in the pawn structure. The pawn on b4, it's a doubled one, but actually quite an annoying pawn for white, because white would like to go c3, d4, but now c3 will always be made by b takes c3. Yeah, so this is not so easy for white to obtain, and black basically just wants to castle, yeah, then go bishop e6, or maybe go b6, bishop b7, execute d5 with relatively easy play. Again, f4 is not really a threat. E takes f4, rook f4, bishop e6, neutralizing the bishop on a2, again with easy play. Therefore the engine suggests knight f3 instead of f4, castles, and now bishop d2, attacking the pawn on b4, a5, defending the pawn, and now c3, bc3 and bishop c3. Yeah, and after b6 we can basically conclude our analysis, because this is the end of the opening, beginning of the middle game, but we can be fairly satisfied with the outcome of the opening. The bishop can be developed to b7, to a6, yeah, maybe even to e6 to exchange the light squared bishops. Black really doesn't have any development problems, and it's a complex middle game ahead. And this is what we set out to do. So basically this is it. This is the analysis of the how black can avoid the trickery of the Giuoco Piano, introduce some trickery of their own. And yeah, I hope you liked this, because I was quite excited when I discovered all this and analyzing and like not knowing where this would lead me. The analysis of these lines after h6, and then these trickeries with developing the bishop to e7, yeah, when postponing castling, and all these like subtle ideas, and the comparisons with the normal lines with bishop e7, with the plans with bishop g4, and so forth. So I was quite happy with the results of this analysis. I hope it also solves your problems if you play e4, e5 and you're struggling with the Giuoco Piano, because I think really it's a very practical thing to be able to deal with these ideas that white has. quite a bit at their disposal. So I will wrap it up. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's smashing time. Yeah, subscribe button. That's what you should do next. Smash that button. And leave your comments. Follow me on socials. Comment there. Comment to the video. I keep saying also this. Subscribe to my Substack. If you become a paid subscriber there, you can suggest which line you would like analyzed on my YouTube video. So that's it for this time. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care.